begin with chapter 32. Exodus chapter 32. And I will announce it again when we're ready to start. The go-ahead text from Roy. I can see the ominous three dots. We are ready. Excellent. Okay. So once again, we are Exodus chapter 32. This parsha, you could spend endless amounts of time on. It's one of the richest and most fascinating in the Torah. I think in some ways the richest and most fascinating. And I'm going to deal with three separate issues. The first one being, of course, the building of the golden calf. So what happens is, at the beginning of 32, it says, when people saw that Moses was so long coming down from the mountain. Now, there are different interpretations about why people thought Moses was so long. One is just that 40 days is a long time when you're sitting in the desert with nothing to do. Another is that they didn't count the time that he went up and the time that he went down, so they counted up to 40, but thought he was staying longer or had died or had gotten lost or something had happened to him. But whatever the circumstance, for whatever reason, once Moses was gone, they go to Aaron and they say, actually, they don't even say we want a golden calf. They say, we want a God, basically. Make us a God who'll go before us. Now, remember, this was in a time of idolatry. Everyone knew what it meant to say, make us a God, right? In other words, make us an idol, a statue. So Aaron, and you can interpret Aaron's conduct in lots of ways. He says, take off your rings. Maybe he was trying to delay. Maybe he thought they wouldn't really give him their jewelry. But whatever the reason, Aaron facilitates the building of the golden calf. And then they gather around it and they say, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So did they really believe that this calf brought them out of Egypt? That seems ridiculous, right? Who could believe such a thing? So the great, and here, the great scholar Yechezkel Kaufman, who was a Bible scholar in Israel, and wrote a monumental, multi-volume history of the Bible. So his thesis, which is still debated to this day, is that the Torah didn't understand idolatry. Is that the Torah was so monotheistic that when it describes idolatry, it's wrong about how idolatry works. Because if you read this, it seems like the Israelites really believed that the golden calf brought them out of Egypt. They're looking at the golden calf and saying, you brought us out of Egypt. He said, but that's not how idolatry works. Idolatry represents forces in the world. He says, no idol maker thinks that the actual statue has power. It's rather that the statue represents natural forces. And when you worship a totem pole, for example, you're not actually worshiping the wood, you're worshiping the forces that the totem pole channels or whatever. That was Kaufman's theory. And in some ways, Ramban, Nachmanides, anticipates this theory because he says the people weren't worshiping the calf as a god. They were worshiping the calf as Moses. Because God didn't disappear, Moses disappeared, right? God didn't change. God wasn't there before visually, and God isn't there now visually. The thing that happened is Moses went up on the mountain. And the Israelites, like all ancient peoples, had been trained to believe in a physical representation of the God, that you couldn't feel God without being able to see a representation of God. This, by the way, is still very powerful to human beings because look at Christianity. Christianity has a physical representation of God, and it makes it much easier to think about God if you think about Jesus than if you can't think about anything, really. Well, yes, there has to be some kind of symbol, which is one of the reasons why you have the Torah, and people sometimes venerate the Torah, even though the Torah is not supposed to be. So the Jewish tradition is filled with symbols, but they are acknowledged purely as symbols of God, and they're never themselves worshipped, but you can feel the impulse to worship by the way people kiss the Torah and kiss the mezuzah. We have that deep need. It's why people care so much about the flag of a country, because it's not about the cloth, but it symbolizes something. So the people build this because they're not used to the idea that God doesn't have some kind of representation. And Aaron says tomorrow's a festival for the Lord, and they offer up burnt offerings, and they eat and drink and dance. And then Moses is about to come down the mountain. Now you'll notice in verse 7, the Lord spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have acted basely." Now, that's pretty amazing. As a lot of people have noted, that's like when the parent says, "Your child did this," right? I mean, after all, God brought them out of Egypt, not Moses. But now that they're acting badly, God says, "Your people that you brought out, look what they're doing. They've turned aside from the way that I enjoined on them. They've made a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" Now, remember, Moses hasn't seen this yet, okay? So that's part one. Part one is just the building of the golden calf, which is an amazing and astonishing thing to happen right after they leave Egypt. But in some ways, the most amazing part of almost the entire Torah is what happens next. The Lord further said to Moses, I'm in verse 9, "I see that this is a stiff-necked people. Now let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, and that I may destroy them, and make of you a great nation." So God says to Moses, first he says, "Let me be," which is ambiguous, like how's Moses going to stop him? But he says to Moses, "I want to destroy the people and make you a great nation." But Moses implored the Lord his God, saying, "Let not your anger, O Lord, blaze forth against the people whom you delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand." He's reminding God of everything that he did. "Let not the Egyptians say it was with evil intent he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth." You're also going to look really bad to the Egyptians because I take questions at the end. They're going to annihilate, they're going to say, "You brought them out of Egypt in order to annihilate you. Turn from your blazing anger, renounce the plan to punish your people." And he does, now Moses has made several arguments, but he doesn't think yet that it's sufficient because he hasn't made an emotional appeal. He's appealed, as it were, to God's ego, but he hasn't made an appeal to God's heart. So he says, "Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel." He doesn't say Jacob. He says Israel, associating Israel with the people Israel now. "How you swore to them by yourself and said to them, 'I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the heavens, and I will give your offspring this whole land of which I spoke to possess forever.'" Now that's an amazing speech that Moses makes. And remember that he makes this speech in the moment of crisis, which is usually when you know, the French have this phrase, the wit of the staircase. You think of the right thing to say afterwards, but at the moment you never think of the right thing to say. And then afterwards you think, why didn't I think to say that? But Moses does actually say all the things that you would expect might change God's mind. And then it says, and the Lord renounced the punishment he'd planned to bring upon his people. Now, again, we're not going to go into this at the moment. We can, when question time comes, you can ask about it. Obviously, for the 1,000th time in the Torah, the picture of God is at odds with the idea of God that we were taught in Hebrew school, which is that God never changes God's mind, that God always knows everything, that God must have known beforehand they were going to do this, on and on and on and on. All I can say at the moment is that's not at all how the Torah depicts it. That may be how the rabbis think of it, but that is not how the Torah depicts it. The Torah depicts God as having discovered this, being angry about it, wanting to destroy the people, and being dissuaded by Moses, which is a really remarkable sequence. And in fact, for those of you who are interested, there is a really fascinating book that was written years ago by Jack Miles, who was the editor of the Los Angeles Times Book Review, and but before he was the editor of the Los Angeles Times Book Review, he spent years as a Jesuit priest. So he really knows the Bible very well. And he decided to do something very interesting. He decided to read the Bible, the Hebrew Bible first. He did it later with the New Testament. The Hebrew Bible as a biography of God, not knowing, as if you don't know anything about God, and this is the biography, and so you should just read it. And what does it say about God? It's called God, a Biography. And it's so good that which is extremely rare, that a book about religion won the Pulitzer Prize. And he uses things like this to talk about what God's temper is like, without all, we always feel obligated to say, of course, God doesn't really have a temper. We're just using the example of God's but if you read the Torah as it is, God is a God of deep emotion. Heschel calls God a God of pathos, right? So here you see that very, very much, and you see Moses' ability to dissuade God from the destruction. But Moses himself has not yet seen what God has seen. And we all know when somebody says, like, your kid trashed his room, you go, look, it's okay, it's all right. And then you go into the room and you see what the kid has done and you feel differently. So God says to Moses, look, they made this golden calf, but Moses hasn't seen it. So it's different. Now Moses is going to see it. Thereupon, verse 15, Moses turned and went down from the mountain bearing the 2 tablets of the pact. Now he's got the 10 Commandments in his hand. Tablets inscribed on both their surfaces. They were inscribed on one side and on the other. So they were double-sided. The tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing, incised upon the tablets. When Joshua heard the sound of the people and its boisterousness, he said to Moses, there's a cry of war in the camp. Because obviously Joshua was waiting in a different place for Moses, because Joshua was like Moses' right-hand man. And also this lets us know that Joshua was not involved in the building of the golden calf. But he answered, it is not the sound of the tune of triumph or the sound of tune of defeat. It's the sound of song that I hear. As soon as Moses came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he became enraged. Now he's furious. And he hurled the tablets from his hands and shattered them at the foot of the mountain. So there are lots of interpretations about why Moses breaks the tablets. The most obvious one is he's angry. He's angry and he shatters them. The rabbis say that the tablets became too heavy in his hands. He couldn't hold them anymore. He couldn't bear to hold the tablets. But I have quoted before this beautiful explanation, which I really like. I don't know that it's the obvious one, but it's a beautiful one, that Moses was thinking, if they made an idol out of the calf that they built like 10 minutes ago, what are they going to do with the tablets that they know came from God? They're going to make an idol out of the tablets. So I'm going to smash them to prevent Israel from sinning again, which is a really beautiful idea and is possible. Who knows? And then he shatters them at the foot of the mountain. He takes the calf and burns it. It's also remarkable, by the way, that Moses he doesn't have the authority to make them not build it when he's gone, but he has the authority to come back and smash and burn it and humiliate them when he comes back. Right now, all of a sudden, everybody's like, oh no, we really messed up. It's like when the teacher walks back into the room, right? And he ground it into a powder and strewed it in water and so made the Israelites drink it. Yes, which is, and just a little addendum, and then I'll make a comment and take questions. Moses said to Aaron, "What did this people do to you that you've brought such a great sin upon them?" He's like, "What, did they torture you? How could you have done this?" And Aaron said, "Let not my Lord be enraged. You know this people's bent on evil. They said to me, 'Make us a god to lead us, for that man Moses, who's brought us from the land of Egypt, we don't know what happened to them.' So I said to them, 'Whoever has gold, take it off.' They gave it to me, and I hurled it into the fire, and out came this calf." So it's a little lame. But you can imagine the two personalities, and in some ways, both personalities are kind of essential for leadership. Aaron is the peacemaker. Aaron is the one who doesn't fight. Aaron is the one who does what the people want. That's why they go to Aaron to make the calf. Aaron is not the person who's gonna struggle with the people. He's like the congressman that everyone goes to when they need their passport renewed. You know, he's the helping guy. He's that kind of person. And Moses, I think of Moses as he has unbelievable internal strength. Moses is the kind of person who, this is the Havdil, this is a very different thing. Moses is the kind of person who would have saved Jews in the Second World War. He wouldn't have cared, right? Just like he doesn't care when he strikes down an Egyptian because he's beating a Jew. And he doesn't care that in Midian that people are fighting. He breaks up the fight. He has an enormous deep sense of what is right and wrong, so much so that he'll even tell God when God's wrong. Don't do this, right? So they are really a study in contrast, these two brothers. And in this kind of situation, obviously Moses' leadership is the one that is essential. But when you think in a very short compass, you have the building of an idol right after they come out of Egypt. By the way, this is all during the creation of the Ten Commandments. The building of an idol, God choosing to destroy the people, Moses dissuading God from destroying the people, Moses destroying the tablets, and then Moses destroying the idol. It's an unbelievable sequence of events, and really quite remarkable that it happens. I wanted to make the addendum, which is here. There are so many other. Okay, I want to say two other quick things about this parsha, just to enrich it. This is also the parsha where Moses asked God to see him, and God says, "You can't see my face." This is 33:17. "I will do this thing you asked for. You've truly gained my favor, and I've singled you out by name." He said, "Oh, let me behold your presence." And he answered, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name Lord and the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show. But you cannot see my face, for man may not see me and live." So he tells him to stand in this cleft of the rock, and he passes before him. And then, last sentence, chapter 34. Look at the very first sentence. The Lord said to Moses, carve 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will inscribe the tablets the words on which you were, etc., etc. It says, so Moses carved 2 tablets of stone, and then where's the next sentence about this? I don't. Okay, you can see though that the difference between the first one was, if you go back to chapter chapter 31:18, it says, when God was finished speaking with Moses on Mount Sinai, he gave him the 2 tablets inscribed with the finger of God. This time, God tells Moses to carve the tablets. So the first tablets are carved by God, the second tablets are carved by Moses. It's the other thing that the sermonic answer to this is that the tablets carved by God are in some sense too much for human beings. The tablets carved by Moses, carved by a human being, they're able to accept. And then the rabbis say the broken tablets and the whole tablets traveled together in the ark. And the lesson that they draw from that is when an old scholar has forgotten his learning, in other words, basically dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever it is for elderly, still treat them with the same respect, because remember that the broken tablets and the whole tablets were carried together in the ark, which is a very beautiful teaching. Okay, that's a dip into Ki Tisa. There's so much there, but questions, comments, please go ahead. And I'll also check the online and see if there are any on. Yeah. I can't hear you. Was it what?
Who is Moses without the Israelites?
God says, I'll make a new people from you. I'll make a new people from your offspring. That's all. We'll start from scratch. That's what God proposes to do. Yeah.
Which is similar to what he said to Abraham.
Right, it's what he did with Abraham, actually. He did it with Abraham, he'll make a new start with Moses. Look, God don't forget that God has restarted the world, right? God creates Adam and Eve, then restarts them outside the Garden of Eden, then restarts the world with the Tower of Babel restarts the world first with the flood of Noah by just Noah and his family, restarts the world with the Tower of Babel by making everybody have different languages, restarts the world again with Abraham and Sarah, so we can restart the world again with Moses. Why not? But Moses won't allow it, which is an amazing thing, if you think about it. Remember that later on, the one character description of Moses in the Torah is Moses was the most humble man who ever lived. That's it. It doesn't say Moses was the kindest, Moses was the sweetest, and if humility is C.S. Lewis's definition, which is the best definition of humility. He said, being humble is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. In other words, Moses isn't focused on him. Moses is focused on the Jewish people. He's not thinking about himself when he says to God, you can't do this because of this, this, and this. It's not because I'm Moses, I'm so smart that I can dissuade you. It's because the people, I'm worried about the people. And so, in fact, there's a book at one point, Moses talks about himself as bearing the people like a mother. And there's a book about Moses called, I wish I could remember, Wildofsky, like the nursing mother or something like that. The selflessness that a parent has for a child, right? Where you really don't think about yourself. It's like the first time in life that you don't think about yourself as if you have a child in front of you, because the child is, that's how Moses operates in the Torah, which is probably why, despite all his other gifts, the gift of humility is the one that they single out. Remember what he says when God comes to him. I don't want to do it. I don't talk right. Don't come to me. Ask somebody else. So it's remarkable to pair that kind of humility with that kind of inner conviction and strength. Yeah. Wildofsky. Aaron Wildofsky. It's a very old book. I mean, I remember actually, I think it goes back to college. So, yeah. Yes.
Why is
So,
this fantastic, this amazing?
so if he's such a great leader, Helen said, and he gets to the point where he negotiates with God, why doesn't he get to go into the land? As you can imagine, there are lots and lots and lots of answers that people have proposed to this. The most, I would say the most common answer is some variation of, he was the right leader for the wilderness, but he wasn't the right leader for the land. The leader for the land had to be an organizer and a military leader. And also because everybody, I mean, what the Midrash says is God comes to Moses and says, look, everybody dies. That's what it is to be a person. 120 years, not a bad run, but everybody dies. So, and then there's also, I think there's supposed to be for us this lesson that no matter how good or gifted or whatever you are, you don't get to accomplish all your goals in this world. There's a Midrash in Ecclesiastes that says that no one dies with half of their goals fulfilled. I think of that Midrash sometimes when I look at my bookshelf, and I think, I really want to read that book and that book and that book and that book, but I'm gonna die with like half of my goals fulfilled. Sure.
Several classes ago about disappointment.
Yes.
Some of the characters.
Okay, was Moses disappointed? So I will send you, I'm sure I can find it. I've spoken several times about the Midrash. There's a Midrash called Midrash Petirat Moshe, the Midrash of the death of Moses. It's heartbreaking. The rabbis speak about how Moses talks to God right when he's about to die and begs just to be able to go into the land, and God won't allow him. So I'll find it and send it to you. But yes, Moses is bitterly disappointed, according to the rabbis. Yeah. Right.
So he has to be on their level, and he has to show things like anger. He react as badly as he could have.
So let me recap that, because I know that not everybody online can hear what the questions are. And that's a nice comment. I just want a nice comment online before I recap by Yavetz Cohen Peretz. I felt like Moses was ordered to carve the tablets because he broke the original ones, a lesson to show him the appreciation of a gift. the work that it takes to carve stones, I'm sure, is a lot of work. I'm sure that's true. So you said that first of all, God shapes the leaders. And one of the ways that God shapes the leaders is by reacting to them in a way to evoke certain reactions from them. So if he says to Moses, I'm going to destroy the people, what he's really trying to do is get Moses to say, no, don't do that, so that Moses can bring out of himself the part of himself that would defend the people, etc., etc. And what I would say to you is that's why I mentioned the Jack Miles book, because if you assume that God is all-knowing, as the rabbis do, that's how they explain God's behavior. When God says to Adam, where are you? They're saying God is giving Adam a chance to fess up and say where I am. It's not that God doesn't know. So if you assume that God is omnipotent and omniscient, absolutely. Then everything God does is in order to give human beings an opportunity to show up in one way or another. If you read the Torah on its own terms, though, then without the preconception that God knows everything, that's not how the Torah presents it. That's the only point I was making. That's the rabbinic interpretation of the Torah, and the sort of catch-all phrase that the rabbis use is Torah dibra bilshon b'nei adam. The Torah speaks in the language of human beings, which means that when it says God gets angry, that's because we wouldn't understand how God actually functions. So it says angry because we know what angry is, but it's not really. So yes, absolutely.
And also, human beings all down. I mean, yes, they.
Well, yeah, so who wrote it down, who wrote the Torah is a question I think maybe we'll get to another time, but
Just to follow up on something.
sure.
Another point about Moses and scribe.
Why don't you take hold of if you take hold of the microphone, people will be able to hear you.
Well, so it says Moses pesalacha, that Moses
Right,
inscribed, but then it said v'chatavti, and I will write.
right,
So God still wrote.
right.
the
God
words.
writes the
There's a
words,
difference.
Moses carves the tablet, right.
Right. So it's carving the tablet is just making the tablet.
I
shape,
guess,
and
I
then
guess.
Moses- and then God put the words.
I
on it.
guess,
And then,
right.
of course, if you watch the documentary from Mel Brooks, you know that God actually made. There were actually 15 commandments. And
Yes, exactly. God made more, and he drops, I'll take that. So is this the new one, by the way? Because Mel Brooks, that's from History of the World Part 1, because there's a new one, Part 2, that right, exactly, yes, because Brooks was there, we know, 2013-year-old man. Anyway, yes.
Imagine that you're a parent and you're coming home from a trip and you've brought some gifts for the kids, and you walk in the house and you see they've had a wild party and there are
Right.
beer cans all over the house. And I'm not giving you those gifts.
And you break it. Yep. It could be that way, absolutely could be that way.
So I was going to observe, and you did also, about the amount of work it takes to carve tablets. So it's not like Moses came up with a set of tools with him, but maybe it kind of symbolizes man's shared responsibility with God's command.
Right. It's the idea of the shutafut, the partnership between human beings and God, is something that you clearly see by the fact even that God chooses leaders, as opposed to just bringing the people out God's self, right? That God chooses human leaders is, and I'll close with this. There's a really nice, one of the names of God, as represented by the shin that's on the mezuzah, is Shaddai. And the Torah Tamima has a really nice interpretation of that. It says the shin represents God. And what does dai mean? What's dayenu? Dayenu is enough. What it means is I'm the God who says enough. I'm only doing this much. The rest of it is up to you, right? Which I always thought was a really nice way of thinking of that name. So, and now I say to you, dayenu. See you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sure.